In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, Richard Stayman and we are going to share our thoughts on the hyped and talented 2025 NBA draft class. Will this class live up to the hype and expectations? Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, the director of scouting for NBA Big Board, and I just started a new, scouting service called Big Board Global, where I will be covering some of the top international prospects for college coaches. And my co-host for today, Mavs Draft, Richard Stayman, you know him. Before I go too deep into the episode, I wanted to thank you for holding it down while I was gone. I thought you, Leaf, and my brother did a good job. I thanked Leaf in yesterday's episode. I thanked my brother. Man, I talk to him 5 times a day, but I wanted to just thank you for holding it down and just kind of basically taking over while I was gone. So I really appreciate that, and I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, hey, we're really happy to have you back as well. It's big shoes to fill. So even though we didn't do it 100%, we tried doing it as much as we could. Nobody can replicate you. So
Oh man, that's definitely not
I'm
true
serious.
because
If you read the comments, every single episode, where's Rafael? Where's Rafael? So we didn't do 100% of the work you can do, but we tried our best to make it as good as you make it. So we
I mean,
appreciate you.
I think that's more so along the lines of because all of a sudden I was doing the show every day, then I was gone. And I think I mentioned in one episode what was going on, but I don't know if I mentioned that I was going to take a break. And then I didn't think it was going to be as long. I thought it was going to be like 2 weeks. Then I thought it was going to be a month. And then there was a setback and so on. So, yeah, I think that's that's part of the reason. Although, I was cracking up when some people were calling me GOAT, and I'm like, come on, man. So they say nobody hypes you up like the friends you have on the internet that you've never met. So I think that's pretty true. But anyway, before we get started, I want to let the audience know that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel as the sports wind down and the slow days of the summer. The sports kind of stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So visit fanduel.com to get started. All right, I feel like I didn't get off all my takes for the 2024 class, but I was actually just kind of glad to move on to 2025. Last summer, I dove right into 24 class, like right after the draft. I didn't take a break. I went right into it. So I was kind of tired of talking about 2024, but I feel like I didn't have closure because I missed the most important part of the draft cycle. But I'm all in on 25. I've started writing articles. I've watched like film on the guys. Just actually I'm on my second round of watching film for a lot of guys because I started probably back in May. Even, for some guys even earlier, just because I was tired of watching the 2024 guys and I didn't want to spend too much time and overthink it. I am excited for this class. I will say this, and I mean it's not like I'm saying something that's profound here. I do think that a lot of these guys that we are hyping up now aren't going to live up to the expectations. And if you go back and look at any draft, it happens. I was looking at, I want to say it was the Banchero Chet draft, and in that draft, I want to say at this time, the top three picks were supposed to be Holmgren, Jalen Duren, and Banchero. Jabari Parker was never, I mean, Jabari Smith was never really mentioned in that category. And he ends up being the third pick. And then some of the names that were mentioned as top 10 picks in that draft were like Ty Washington, JD Davison, Damian Collins. It's so, I mean, it happens every year. It happens every year. So anyway, with that being said, I'm I don't want to say the guys that I think are gonna fall off, but I do think that this class is good, and I do think that there are guys that we're probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about later on in the year. But anyway, what is your overall thoughts on this draft class?
Yeah, if I echo everything you said with I did the same thing where I got tired of the class and I started watching more and more high school film. This is also the year, I think this is the first year where I've watched a full year and a half of everybody in this in high school. I didn't dive into high school until really last year, I would say, on a full scale cycle where I went to EYBL in April of 23. So I got to see them all play, all the 17 U's who are now the rising freshmen. And then I went to City of Palms in December, so I got to see a lot of the top kids like Trey Johnson, Cooper Flagg, Liam McNeeley, Boogie Flan, a bunch of other people out there. So I am very excited for this class, and I think there might be almost bias now. I'm interested to see because in high school, everybody looks great, and you can kind of plant your flag a lot earlier. I'm interested to see how that works because, like you said, everything isn't going to look exactly the same a year from now.
Mhm.
But I do think that if we are talking about just the star power here, I think it is actually very loaded in the top 15. Like regardless of compared to 24, even I think it's on par with 23's overall top to bottom lottery. Doesn't have a Wembanyama for me, but I do think that there is going to be from like 2 to 14, not that drastic of a fall off.
We'll see. I mean, there's some guys that I watch and I'm like, oh man, this guy is I can see why he dominated high school. And then there's some guys I'm like, ooh, I wonder how it's gonna scale up to stronger competition. But even like 2024, it was supposed to be considered a weak class. If I'm not mistaken, like half of the McDonald's All-Americans ended up transferring. I guess I'm trying to say, like, if 2024 was considered a weak class and the McDonald's All-Americans in that class, half of them like have already transferred or weren't one and dones in what is considered a weak class, it just makes me, really wonder like how many of the guys from this class are going to live up to the hype. I did some research last year in the 2024 draft, I should say. I think there were just 10 freshmen. There were just 10 one and dones and I want to say it was Castle in a lottery. I think it was five. It was Castle, Reed Shepard, Rob Dillingham, Cody Williams, and Bub Carrington. Now, out of those guys, at this time last year, only Castle was projected as I guess Cody Williams, Castle and Cody Williams. So you had three guys that kind of came out of nowhere in 2024 that ended up being lottery picks. So maybe in a later episode we'll get to some guys that we think could be like this year's Reed Shepard. But who is your like top prospect that if you had to put money on this guy succeeding, who would it be?
I'll go away from like the consensus top five because I'm not going to say like Cooper Flag or Ace Bailey or something, someone who already is at that top. For me, it's somebody else who I think is starting to gain traction. He's been around a lot of places for recruitment. He was originally at Indiana. Now he's at Connecticut. I'm all in on Liam McNeeley. I think he just gets the game, extremely smart, has really good defensive foundation, can shoot the ball very well, and he's already played his NBA role this last year in high school with Cooper Flag, Derek Queen, like in a low usage off ball threat, and can just do all the dirty work and thrive and be very efficient. I think that's what he's going to do in the NBA as well as college, and also him playing off of Caravan next year in Connecticut. How do you guard each of the corners? If you have both of them in one corner, like that's an impossible task, I think, for the defense.
Dallas guy. I've seen Liam play a few times. I mean, like Trey Johnson, guys that I was able to see locally. And then they have some good tournaments here, like the circuit, where I've been fortunate where for the high school guys, I haven't had to leave the city to watch to watch them play. Because I'll be honest, I do not like scouting high school games. I can't stand it. Even on film, you're watching like there was a film I was watching on Dylan Harper, and it was like a fingerprint on the camera. So there's like a spot on the camera is blurry, and I mean, it was so frustrating to me. Or then you watch like no knock on like Baller TV or some of those places. Or even like when they have like the high school games on Synergy, it's like some ninth grader that's filming a game on the iPad. The guy gets a steal. and the camera just stays at half court, and then you don't get to see the dunk. It's so even like watching high school games in person, sometimes you're like, these guys stand out so much that like the guys that are considered like NBA prospects usually have like a major physical advantage over some guys. So you'll see like, a guy that's a projected NBA wing and he's bigger than the other team's starting center. And so high school is a little bit, it's not my favorite to scout. I actually like kind of scouting like the FIBA international games, especially on film, because it's like a real broadcast and it looks it's a lot easier and it's more structured in a sense as far as team play. Well, I think that some of the, especially in the AAU, and I'm not like knocking AAU, but sometimes you can tell the guys don't practice. And that's because you look at the team's roster, like it can be a Dallas team. You're like, okay, this guy's from Houston, this guy's from Austin, this guy's from Oklahoma City, this guy's from Little Rock. How are they practicing? So high school is like I said, it's just not my favorite to scout. But McNeeley, do you see him as a top 10 pick?
I think he could get there, but I think the league is gonna overthink him and let him fall. I think when you look at how the league generally is, it's hard to be somebody who is low usage in the lottery. It's generally not super common. I think Isaac Okoro, like usually there's one every year that ends up being it. Isaac Okoro in 2020, I remember had a drastically lower usage than anybody else in the lottery. I think someone's going to take a gamble on somebody with more on ball skills, but I think it dismisses Liam's game. I think he's probably going to go somewhere in the teens, but he should be in the top 10.
Okay.
Like just because of his floor. His floor is just so high.
Yep. All right. When we return, I want to talk about a guy from Dallas. I kind of mentioned him earlier that I've seen quite a bit. I want to hear your thoughts on it. I want to talk about Trey Johnson. But before we get into that, let's talk about FanDuel because I love sports and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as we get into early August, late July, outside of the Olympics, we get fewer games and there's just not a lot of sports. But FanDuel keeps the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime, and I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Once again, thank you for making the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast because there is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as formed and entertained as Locked On NBA. It is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, second segment. I know we're supposed to be comparing draft classes, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on Trey Johnson. And the reason I wanted to hear your thoughts on Trey Johnson is because I spent yesterday rewatching his film. Now, I've been following him since he was, I want to say since he was in 10th grade. But someone reminded me that back when I used to do like video projects for youth teams, they were like, if I go back in my hard drive, I can probably find some games where I was filming him when he was in like third grade. And so, and the reason and look, I'll be honest, I'm not saying that I was like filming third graders, identifying NBA prospects. I used to, I used to work for Mo Williams when he had Mo Williams Academy, and Mo had sons, where he has sons that are now like I want to say senior, 11th grade. I mean, Mo has like five boys, and they're like back to back to back. And so when I used to work for Mo, I used to go and film his kids' games because he was still playing at the time, and he wanted me to film his kids' games so I could send him the footage back when I think he was playing in Charlotte and Minnesota at that time. So anyway, I have like a database of these games of his sons that I was filming. I've been told that if I look back in those old videos, I have footage of Trey Johnson when he was like in second or third grade. I haven't taken the time to go back, but I said all that to say this. What are your thoughts on Trey and where do you have him? Because I think, and I'm a big fan of his game, I think it could be feast or famine for him.
Yeah. I'm actually a very big fan of Trey. I've also seen him since he was at Lake Highlands in 10th grade as well, when he played against Casey
Kaysen,
Wallace. And
Rylan Griffin gave him like
yes,
39 or
yes.
something like that.
I was like, I know he transferred from Bama. I couldn't remember who it was. Yeah. Yeah, him and Ryland were teammates. So or not him and Ryland, Kaysen and Ryland.
Yeah.
They played against each other though. And like I remember watching him, he was the number one player for 2024 at the time, because things change. But he was just phenomenal the way he got to his own shot. And it's funny, somebody who I trust very much in high school, who watches all these games a lot more closely than I do, brought up a really good point about him, which he was brought on every single stop he was at. Lake Highlands, Link, Houston Hoops, and EYBL. Every single one of them, he was never supposed to be a point guard. He was always supposed to be that shooting guard, small forward, just a true wing. And every single one of those stops, he had to play point guard. And I think that is a very, very good experience for him, because now he's able to be that secondary ball handler as needed. That could be an actual role. So I really like his game. I just think he's super complete. I loved him when I saw him in person in December. Seen him multiple times, but I like him, the athleticism and size and shooting combo. He was on the one of the FIBA teams last year. Really liked him there. But I have him right now, number 9. I think it's just a testament to the strength of the class. I've had him really anywhere from 5 to 9. I've gone back and forth. Nolan Triori passed him up. Liam McNeeley, I started thinking like he is one of the safest players, and I value being the safest player. So I think those are the only 2 guys who have really moved him lately, moved over him. But ultimately, I still would absolutely buy all the Trey stock.
All right, I got a Trey Johnson story time, and then we'll get back to the subject. So it was last year. I think I might have told you this. Last year during the pre-draft process, and now I know I have the video, and maybe I can officially release it now because the guys that he was torching are now in the NBA. So last year, I want to say it was like May, and there was a pre-draft workout here in Dallas. And I don't want to name the names, but there were a bunch of guys that were either drafted in the first round or second round in the 23 draft. And so they're scrimmaging half court, and then Trey walks in. So I remember joking like, man, this dude's supposed to be in like lunch or PE. Like it's the middle of the school day because school wasn't out yet. So I want to say it was like maybe May or whatever. He comes in and the guys are playing one on one, like 2 dribbles, 3 dribbles, or whatever. And it was just like kind of a post workout, red, white, and blues, what we call it, but it's basically like continuous one on one. So Trey walks in. I mean, looking every bit of 12 years old. He's significantly smaller than he. Like if you look at his frame, he's put on some muscle over the last year, and he's absolutely frying these guys in ones. A couple of guys were drafted in the first round of the 23 draft, frying them. He's like blowing by guys, dunking with his left hand, just a whole variety of tough step backs, side steps, mid range pull ups. I mean, absolutely frying them. So, with that being said, there was a point where I thought like his shot selection is like a heavy diet of contested shots, and I think that could maybe turn some teams off. But and I'm glad you mentioned it. He is a guy that can play. I think he can play the point. Maybe not full time. The vision is there. I think the vision is there, and I do think that his draft range this year could be dependent on how many on-ball reps he gets. Because I think if you put him in that role that, like you said, that he's been having to play, or he starts off playing as like this wing and scorer, I think the shot selection and where he gets his shots may turn teams off because it's going to be some mid post ISO, basically 2000 style basketball and a lot of contested shots. Like even if he's open on catch and shoot jumpers, he's more comfortable with a rhythm. He may pass up an open one and then shoot a sidestep three. So I do think if he's not playing on the ball, that could kind of hurt his draft stock a little bit. But I do think that if you put him or I'm sorry, if he's playing off the ball, that may hurt his draft stock. But I do think if you put him on the ball and allow him to play pick and roll, I mean, he can get to his mid range. That's his bread and butter. But I think he's a really, really underrated passer that makes live dribble reads. He has a little flash and flair to his passes, but I think the vision is there. And so I hope he gets an opportunity to play with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I echo that fully. I think when you look at what he does too, I actually think even playing off the ball, he could be a really good player. Now it's going to hide some of his strengths, and who knows with Texas? I think they've had a little bit more difficulty selling some of their top prospects in years past. But I think ultimately, even if he's that off-ball threat like he was in FIBA last year, he's still going to be able to look good because that jumper is so good.
Did you think he played well in FIBA last year? For some reason I felt like he didn't play
He,
well
he
in
was
FIBA.
he was the youngest player on the team, and he had probably one of the least amount of. He was probably the least respected player for coaches, it seemed, just based on how he was used and everything. I feel like even though it was a bad situation, I thought he made the most of his minutes. Like he was only a shooter, and that's kind of like what is I think his worst case at Texas is. And he's still efficient, I believe. I would need to look at the stats, but I think he was still making a good amount of shots.
Yeah, you're right. I looked it up. 11 points, 2.9 rebounds, 2.6 assists. He shot 43% from the floor, 35% from three, but 94% from the foul line. So I guess it wasn't as bad as I thought. I mean, it was better than Reese Lachey and Sar, who averaged 7 points a game both and went
Yeah.
1 and 2. All right, when we return, we'll get back on subject. I want to just hear your thoughts, basically just kind of comparing this to some of the other classes, and if you think that the top end guys in this class can be as good as maybe Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green or Victor and Wembanyama. But before we get into that, I'm sorry, Victor Wembanyama and Brandon Miller. But before we get into that, let's talk about BetterHelp because this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/locked on NBA and get on your way to being your best self. Now, if you are thinking about starting therapy, I suggest you give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online and it is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to fit your schedule. All you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched up with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. And therapy is good because it helps you, for example, maybe with coping skills, learning how to set boundaries. And sometimes you just may need someone to talk to that is unbiased in your life. So, like I said, if you're thinking about starting therapy, you have to give BetterHelp a try. Like I said, it's online, it is flexible, and if you give BetterHelp a try, actually just visit betterhelp.com/locked on NBA today and you will get 10% off your first month. That's better, HELP.com/locked on NBA. Never skip therapy day with Better Help. All right, last segment. So let's just say, based off of the hype coming into this class, where do you rank the hype of this incoming class compared to other classes around the same time? So, last year a lot of people were down on 2024, which I think is going to end up being a better class than people thought. Maybe not as top heavy. And then obviously 23 was supposed to be a crazy class. I think well, Brandon Miller kind of came out of nowhere. He wasn't supposed to be one of the dudes in that class, and he ended up being, in my opinion, the second best. But overall, like, where do you rank this class out of maybe like the last five?
Yeah, out of the last five in terms of pre-draft hype, it's definitely not 2020. That one did not have that much.
But
Um,
that class, like, this is why it's so hard to like predict because 2020 had no hype. And if you
yeah,
look at the 2020 class, just off the top of my head, that's Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese
Maxi.
Maxey,
Yep.
Desmond Bain. I feel like I'm missing somebody. You have, I mean, that's what, four All Stars right there?
There's
Yeah.
somebody else, and I'm drawing a blank at who
Ball,
it is too.
Edwards. So 20. 2020 was actually a good class that didn't have a lot of hype coming into it. I mean, that was the class where LaMelo went to Australia.
Yep.
RJ Hampton was supposed to be really high. He went to Australia. Wiseman played a few games. Anthony Edwards didn't go to, like a blue blood school where you saw him on TV all the time. But that class was really good.
Yeah, I don't. Still though, like all the hype was generated about like LaMelo Ball just 2 years after or 3 years after his brother had come out of the draft, and like obviously the Ball family was still pretty popular.
But if you
Not
remember though, Melo didn't have any hype until he played in that preseason tournament.
sure,
And then that's
sure,
when it switched. Because if I remember
yeah,
correctly, he wasn't on draft boards. And then all of a sudden, because he had that weird senior year where I mean, I guess when they went to Lithuania, then he played for whatever. But then it's like when he played in Australia at that I forgot the name of it. It's like that preseason tournament. And then he just went from like
yeah. He emerged.
nowhere. I mean, he was known, but I think people really legitimately took him serious as a draft pick as opposed to like being like a show. Because I think at one point it
Yep.
was more seen as like a show.
Yeah, he was entertainment.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. It's not 2019, even though, because I'm trying to think of the classes where I'm like, there was a lot of hype around Zion, but there wasn't hype around the class, right? So 2019's immune. 2021's tough because there was 1 week in between the draft ending in 2020 and the season starting in 2020 for the 21 season. So I'm kind of going to blank that out. I don't think 22 had that much hype. So really 23 is the only one left by process of elimination. Now, what it really reminds me of though is the best one. This isn't within the last five. It just missed the cutoff, but it reminds me actually of how in 2018, I remember hearing about Luca, right? Where it was like, that was one of the few classes where I would hear people who do not care about the draft. They're just NBA people say like, oh, have you seen this kid in Europe? Like Luka Doncic, there's DeAndre Ayton, just like that level of talent this far out, drawing non-draft people in, this has been up here for one of the best. I think last year's within the last 5 years, the most or yeah, 23 being last year being the most comparable, but 2018 is the true like one that reminds me of the most of this.
To me, it was 2019, just because of the Duke guys. Because I feel like people kind of heard about Luca, but there's people that are always going to be skeptical about Europeans getting the hype. But I feel like 2019 was the one with RJ Barrett, who had just torched Team USA for like 30 something points at the under, I think it was the under 19s. I was there at that game. Then you had Cam Reddish, who everybody loved. And then you had Zion. And if I remember correctly, depending on who you speak with, Zion was considered to be like the third best in that class. Like there were some people that thought it was going to be Barrett and Reddish going 1-2. I don't think Ja had a major buzz coming into that season, but I just remember the Duke guys having like significant buzz and that people were, just kind of talking non-draft followers were talking about Duke. And then, I mean, I think like Zion's first game was against like Navy or something like that. I just felt like the whole world was watching it. Then Obama was showing up to games. So I do think like with this class having a lot of guys in college basketball, I do think that Cooper Flag is going to be like the most hyped college prospect as far as must see TV since Zion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like think about how many guys are going to powerhouses. I mean, for me, four of the top five players on my board are at three schools. Like two Duke guys, two Rutgers guys. I mean, there's multiple Arkansas guys. There's it starts to spread out a little bit more. But I mean, even if you go down my board, I have four guys from Duke in my top 25. Yeah, my top 25. I was gonna say first round, but I slipped there. But like that is remarkable. Even no matter where you fall on some of these polarizing guys like, and it could be five. I think Con Newpol's the guy who kind of starting to, people are looking at him going, well, he's actually pretty good. So they could be like the way 2012 Kentucky was, where they have five first round picks. Like, I don't think that's far fetched.
I can't see all
I
of
mean,
those miles being fed. There, and just in my opinion,
yeah,
I think Malo Ouch is going to go really high and he won't need to be productive. I mean, if he can just be lively, if he averages 7 points and
yep.
block some shots and have some highlight real dunks, I think that he could go high without the production. I talked to a guy that's a Duke guy that he's like he's kind of upset with the direction of the program in a sense because he feels like all they're doing is trying to collect the most assets or the best players. He thinks that they've fallen into to the Kentucky thing, but he's like their pieces don't fit. And that's kind of my concern because somebody's going to be the odd man out at Duke. Like, I mean, you got Proctor, you have, your guy Sion James, who you really like. Then they had a transfer from Syracuse, right?
Malik Brown, yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
like him. He
then
had a 5x5 in a game.
yeah, and then you have Isaiah Evans, who some people think is a top 10 pick. Like, how are they going to keep all of those guys happy? And then Arkansas, the same thing. Like, I feel like Zvonimir Ivisic went into the same exact situation that he was at in Kentucky. Rutgers, that can be a whole episode. Like, that's gonna be very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad college basketball is back. I think for us in this media space, it's going to be helpful because the guys are going to be playing on national TV consistently. Think about it, the last few years. Victor was you had to like go on the NBA app to watch Victor. You had to go on the NBA app to watch Scoot and Ron Holland and Matas Bazelis and those guys, and even like Jalen Green. Then you had like I said, Victor was overseas, SARS was overseas. This year, outside of Traore and Asenge, well, I mean Zakarsky, but for the most part, I think the guys with all the hype are going to be able to be seen on ESPN and CBS all throughout the year. So I think the hype are it's just good for us and good for college basketball.
Yeah, I truly do think that like just the sandwich of this draft, right? The 24 draft being next to Wemby and Cooper Flag in that year, like the talent next to it is just remarkable. And I think there's so many guys, like you said, we could do a whole episode about some of these, like the Rutgers one. Arkansas is an interesting one too, because they got John L. Davis and Boogie Fland, and John L's got to be fed too. So like
And DJ Wagner.
and DJ Wagner. Yeah, there's a lot of those. I mean, North Carolina is another one where I'm interested to see how many of these guys transfer because there's a lot of incoming talent, not just the freshman class, but also the way transfer portal changes the game. There's just so many different guys at so many different schools that I feel like there's a lot of overlap, but maybe it works. Like also Darian Reed at Alabama, even though like he's going to be the freshman on a team full of veterans, mostly seniors. Like, I'm interested to see how that goes. The Georgia is an interesting one with Santos Cyril and Asa Newell. Like that kind of stuff. It's just
Savo,
fascinating.
my
It's
guy
everywhere.
Savo Drezic. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
kind of pumping the brakes on this class because I think it's going to be a situation where some of the highly touted freshmen are on a team that is looking to win, not necessarily develop them, and they're going to be playing behind or next to a 22 or 23-year-old. So the
Yep.
freshmen may be the better NBA prospects, but the better college player for winning or experience could end up. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of Peyton Watsons in this draft. A guy that was super hyped coming in, and he comes off the bench and plays sparingly behind someone that he's a better prospect than, but a guy that is older and more mature. I can see that happen at Arkansas. I can see it happening to some of the guys at Duke, North Carolina. So I'm pumping the brakes because I just don't think everyone's gonna have the opportunities that we're
Yeah.
expecting.
I do think so. When I did my board a few weeks ago, and what I did was I didn't make it a 2025 draft class. I did it recruiting like this upcoming year. I did the long-term ranking because I think when we look back at the players that were in this pool now, I think we're going to talk about it as one of the strongest preseason just classes of college basketball that we've seen in a very long time. Now, whether some of these guys go to pro this year, whether they finish at the same school that they started at, is a whole different topic. But I do think I fully buy into the long term talent of a heavy majority of these players.
That was smart. That was real smart of you to look at it that way. It may not have been like the sexiest way to look at it, as far as like promoting it, but when you look at it from the broad scope, long term, it does make a lot of sense because Again, I just think there's a lot of overlapping. There's, a lot of guys that I think that may not get the minutes that we think they're going to get. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. This was a fun one. I mean, we have plenty of time to talk about 2025. One of the things that we are going to do during the off season, in a sense, we're just going to dedicate full episodes to players where we're going to share our thoughts, strengths, weaknesses, concerns, fit. And so we have, I don't know, I'm guessing around 100 days until college basketball. So we have plenty of time. So we're going to have some episodes fully dedicated to single prospects. Once again, it's Rafael with Richard Stayman, and we are out. But before we go, I got to let you know that we thank you for making Locked On NBA Big Board your first podcast listen of the day. But you got to check out the Locked On NBA podcast, because the off season, or the NBA season, never ends with Locked On. We got the national experts giving you a local perspective. So check it out, Locked On NBA. It is in the description, so you do not need to search. It's part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. We are out.